2020, a year like no one could have imagined, filled with unprecedented challenges and disruption in Indiana and around the country.
Make no mistake about it, this disease is killing people.
The coronavirus pandemic that has killed nearly 4,000 people in Indiana and left thousands of Hoosier businesses on the brink of collapse.
Unconstitutional Hoosier hunker down order.
It's pretty apocalyptic, and I feel like it is painted as hopeless when there's plenty of hope.
We're tired of sitting in our homes. We're tired of sitting around. We want to go back to work, get our lives going together.
Protests demanding real social justice reform and an end to systemic racism.
I'm here with my family. We demand justice. My father shouldn't have been killed like this. We want justice.
The killing of George Floyd was the spark, but the tinder that this set off was years of similar brutalities and killings of African Americans all over the country.
We want people to have their voices heard about some really systemic problems that are going on. I wonder if there's a difference between like policing the protests and then policing violence and looting.
These people are not protesters. They're destructors. They're destroyers.
And in just a matter of days, an election day that could change the course of the country for a generation.
Gentlemen, everybody knows he's a liar.
Nothing smart about you, Joe.
And after the votes are counted, how do we move forward as a nation and tackle the challenges that still lie ahead?
Now from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics, Special Edition.
And thank you so much for joining us for this special edition of All Indiana Politics. We are now just 6 days away from Election Day.
And tonight we want to talk about the major issues facing the country. Not specific candidates, but the issues themselves. And we want to do it with two people who have helped shape the country's policies for more than 20 years.
Yeah, and here to help us introduce them, our partners for the night from the Indianapolis Urban League, Tony Mason. Tony.
Thank you, Phil and Brooke. I'm Tony Mason, President and CEO of the Indianapolis Urban League. The Urban League has been a proud part of this community for 55 years, working to promote civil rights. We've all watched the growing partisan fight over the past few years, and especially during this election season. Tonight, we want to talk about issues and not personalities. That's why the Indianapolis Urban League is proud to help bring two top political names together to talk about the challenges we face and how we can move forward together. Donna Brazile is a veteran Democratic strategist. She was the first African American to manage a presidential campaign with Al Gore in 2000. She twice served as chair of the Democratic National Committee. She's also a former chair of the DNC's Voting Rights Institute, which focuses on encouraging young people to vote. Michael Steele is a former chair of the Republican National Committee. He's a self-described Lincoln Republican. He served as the Lieutenant Governor of Maryland from 2003 through 2007. He's the first ever African American to win statewide office in Maryland. The Indianapolis Urban League is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization with the goal of making sure that everyone can vote. We hope tonight helps inspire you to do that. Brooke and Phil?
All right, Tony, we hope so too. We have several topics we want to discuss over the next hour, but we want to start with an issue, Phil, that only seems to be getting worse.
It certainly is, and that is how polarized American politics have become and who's to blame. So, Donna Brazile, thank you very much for being here. We'll start with you. Your thoughts on this topic?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and it's wonderful always to be a part of a conversation with the Urban League. And of course, I love Indiana. I was so happy that I had an opportunity to come last year to serve as one of the MLK keynote speakers. So thank you, Indiana. Polarization has been in our politics for a long time. And unfortunately, the polarization we see today has many fathers and a few mothers. It starts with the fact that not only are we divided along party lines, but often along class lines, regional lines. And so it's very important as we looked at this hyper partisan polarization, that we look at efforts to how do we heal? How do we bring people together? How do we begin to compromise on some of the major issues facing us today? So while the polarization didn't start with this president or even the last president, we now see with the kind of system we have in politics where Democrats vote in their primary, Republican votes in their primary. Independents are often left off the table. What happens is that we get the heart right, sometimes the heart left, and there's hardly anybody in the middle that can often facilitate or try to bring us together.
Michael, your take on this one?
Yeah, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be with you, Phil, and Brooke. Thank you, and it's always great to be with my friend Donna Brazile, and the work that we've been able to do together in this space, particularly, is very, very important. And I appreciate Indiana opening up its heart to this conversation. The realities are very plain, and I think Donna put her finger on a very important one. One of those realities is how we have come apart because of political differences, how we let that tribalism sort of infect institutions that citizens need and citizens rely on. And one of the most important, of course, is the vote. It is the one thing that doesn't or should not have that real hard partisan taint to it. And yet we find ourselves more and more polarized. And I think what this election has been able to bring out is not just around some of the issues that may have been talked about throughout the campaign, but certainly around the character of the country, the character of its people, the importance of these institutions, and more importantly, our civic responsibility as citizens. As Hoosiers, to step into, what we're constitutionally allowed to do, and that is to shape this government. Folks, the most important words in our founding documents are three: we, the people. We have the opportunity always, in every election, at every time, in every moment, to shape the direction of the country. And I think a lot more Americans now appreciate that, or are coming into appreciating that, in this election cycle, which is why access to the ballot box, access to polling places is so important. And the fact that so many citizens, close to 70 million, have already cast their ballot speaks to that.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about early voting. We've seen incredible voting turnout here in Indiana locally. We're going to get to that in a minute. But I want to stick with the divisive nature right now that we're at as a nation. And the Republicans and Democrats still at a standstill over a COVID stimulus right now. This is where the people truly suffer when we get so divided. Is this partisan politics? Michael, I'll start with you. Why can Congress not come together when something this important is on the line?
Because they're stuck on stupid. I can't put it any plainer than that. I mean, this is the least partisan moment we can have. This would be as if, ladies and gentlemen, is if after 9/11, the Congress and the White House said, we're bickering over dollars and cents in response to one of the great tragedies of our time. After the economic collapse of 2008, the Bush administration on its way out said, well, that's not my problem. That's a problem for the next administration. And the Congress, go, well, whatever, we'll see what happens. We need our leaders to step into this moment. We need, Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats, they put a bill out there. Trump thinks it's too much money. Fellas, ladies, work it out. This is not hard. There is a number, and we know what that number is. Get to the number and give the citizens of this country the relief they need so that our small businesses can stay afloat, so that our communities can provide the services that they need to provide, our financial instruments that we're, loans and all of that are not interrupted. So, this is not a complicated issue at a time like this. And I just wish more of our partisans in the House and the Senate, and in the White House for that matter, cared and looked a little bit more at what's needed in this moment and worried about the bickering on the other side.
Donna, is this simple partisan politics?
Absolutely. Look, the Democrats passed a bill in May. It's been sitting literally on the desk of Mitch McConnell. The president said, look, the president is a Republican. The Republicans control the Senate. The president said, move the bill. And they started to move the bill. Secretary Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, went over and talked to Speaker Pelosi. They came up with a goal. The Democrats were able to come down off the high water mark of over $3 trillion. The Republicans were able to come up a little bit. And so here we are sitting here today with over 220,000 of our fellow citizens dead, over 8 million infected by this, impacted by this virus, millions of more without health care. Of course, the 1 out of 4 Americans are now facing food insecurity, small businesses closing. And all of a sudden, we got this close. The president tweeted, they stopped. And then the president tweeted again, we started again. We're almost there in terms of the magic, so-called magic number. But now, as they say, the devil is in the details. The details are very important, but this is where partisanship comes in. The Democrats believe that we have to move a bill that contains more money to reopen our schools, more money for targeted businesses that did not get help in the first allocation of resources, the CARES Act. And the Democrats strongly believe that there needs to be tax credits for those suffering family, the earned income tax credits. The Republicans are looking at issues of liability, making sure that small and other businesses are able to get through this. So while the numbers may not be as significant as it was, say, 2 months ago, they're very close, but the language. Now we have to wait until the election. Well, we didn't have to wait until the election to get another judge through. We should be focused today on making sure that we have the resources. As we speak right now, there's a storm that is approaching my beloved hometown. About an hour ago, I get a phone call, the internet is out. Another 30 minutes ago, the trees are coming down. It was a category 1. A category 1 in Louisiana is like, well, you know, we can continue to do what we want to do. A category 2, whoa. Category 3, Katrina was a category 3. And yet Congress will bicker, I'm sure, after this is over with in terms of providing relief to the people of the Gulf Coast. We need to have common sense approaches to solving our problems. We can have principled leaders, both on the conservative side as well as the progressive and those in between, but we should be able to do the work for the American people.
And we should. And I think that that's what we're talking about. In times where it matters, we should be coming together, yet we aren't. And so the American people are wondering, have we opened a Pandora's box? Is there any way back? What is the answer? Do we have to vote everyone out and start over? Honestly, what is the answer here for our viewers who are wondering, how do we get back to normal?
So, hey, Brooke, can I take that one, please?
Yes, you can, Michael. Go ahead. Yeah, you may have to do that. I mean, when you're stuck on stupid, every parent knows, everybody's had that child in the family. You look at them and go, you know what? I'm just going to have to do something dramatic with this one, right? We've all been there. We know, and we are the parents in this situation. We're the ones who govern the outcomes here ultimately. And two things. One, as citizens, we need to get back in the game, and we need to reassert our prominence and our position relative to this government, because we are the government. We're the ones ultimately decide. They serve at our pleasure. They serve on behalf of us. And when they stop serving us, when they become more interested in their own reelection, when they become more interested in their own partisan policy hiccups, that's when it's time to go. That's when it's time to, you look and go, you've been here 30 years and you still can't get it done? See ya. You've been here one term and you haven't done anything? Bye-bye. So we need to step into that game. The second part of that is the reality of it is, we have grown accustomed in the past to having leadership by the White House, by the president, to sort of move the needle for us. And as Donna noted earlier, just on the stimulus, the president said, no, I don't want to play. No, we're not doing it. Then he's like, well, let's get engaged. He has the opportunity, I think, and I know many Republicans have been saying this privately and some publicly to him, myself being one of them, take this moment and push the Senate Republicans to take the risk on your behalf and on behalf of the American people to get this deal done. I think the president can serve himself immensely if he showed that kind of leadership at this hour, because a lot of folks, that's what they want. They're just looking for that. And so, yeah, when the Congress and the Senate aren't doing what they're supposed to do, it's time to go. And when the White House isn't stepping up to the plate, it's time for the American people to put pressure on them to do so.
We have a crisis of leadership in this country, and it's not just at the top, it's across the board. We stopped listening to each other. We don't tune in to the other side. I work for Fox News, Michael Steele works for MSNBC. I am outnumbered. He's outnumbered. But you know what? We're able to get our point across. I learned more sitting on ABC for over a decade, listening to George Will and many of my other colleagues on the right who simply wanted to talk about what the Constitution said or what our founders believed. Of course, I wanted to say, well, this is happening right now. And how do we address this right now? So we can find middle ground. We can find it, but you need leadership, not just in our political arena. We need leadership in our companies, academia, every facet of American life today, including law enforcement. They're all underwater, which means that the American people are disapproving of the democratic institutions that are so-called, they exist to protect our rights and protect our freedom and our liberties. And yet we have no faith. We've lost faith in each other, and we've lost faith in our institutions. That's problematic in my judgment.
Yeah.
Donna, a broader question here for you. How can, regardless of who wins next week, how can we get the economy jump-started next year and get people back to work?
You got to get this. We have to get this health pandemic under control. I mean, just a few hours ago when I was teaching my class at Georgetown, one of my students posted in one of these little chat boxes that they believe that France is going to shut down again. Germany may shut down. Look, if we have another shutdown, I mean, Michael may have a better word from this, but it is going to collapse our economy. I'm not one of these scary people out there. I mean, I believe Halloween should be, reserved for children, not for those of us who are adults. But the truth is that we got to get this pandemic under control. We got to get this virus under control. If it means more tracing, more testing, more tracing, making sure that everyone understands the risk involved. I have a cousin now in Texas. He's in ICU. Why? He has sickle cell anemia. He has a pre-existing condition. This is the second time he's been to the emergency room. He's trying to take care of himself, but he's a frontline worker. So we have to get this virus under control, and then we have to figure out ways to reboot our economy. Some sectors have been hurt. I mean, I cannot tell you every morning, I don't know about you, Michael. Michael and I don't live too far apart, but some of our shopping malls closed. Of course, the beauty salons, the barber shops, the mom and pop stores. You can go down several of the biggest streets here in Washington, D.C., and they're closed. They're closed for business. So the only way to get this economy back on track is to get this virus under control.
And it's kind of a two-pronged situation here, Michael, because not only do you have the economy on a personal level outside of government, but you also have the federal debt as well, which continues to rise. How do you tackle that?
Well, first off, let me give an amen to what Donna just said. First and foremost, our priority as a nation has got to be the virus. Whether it is Donald Trump or Joe Biden, the next president has to make that a priority, because as we're already beginning to see, we're now beginning to get into that surge moment. We have our European allies who are now beginning to realize, we're going to have to do and take dramatic action again. So this is not going to go away until we handle it. And until we handle it, it's going to be much more difficult to do the economics, because a lot of whatever economics are out there are either going to be lost in the ether of shutdown and no business, or what monies are available are going to be directed towards dealing with the pandemic. The state of Indiana, like the state of Maryland and the District of Columbia, where my friend Donna lives, are dealing with holes in their budget from this year. As they look at their budgets for next year, they have to balance that budget. How do they close those holes? How do they fill those gaps? That's their reality. That's the reality of all 50 states and our territories. These budgets and these moments have to be attended to. So small business owners and the like are on the cusp. I did a talk before a group of bankers the other day. These were frontline original funders under the PPP program, right? Getting those dollars into small business owners' hands around the nation. Well, those programs are dried up. Those dollars aren't there. Mortgages aren't getting paid, rents aren't getting paid. These realities are harsh. So let's say we turn that corner on the healthcare front, on the virus. Now we look at putting America back to work. and immediately figure out how much money we need to allocate for that. Yeah, and it's going to cost us. We're looking at $1 trillion worth of deficits by the end of this fiscal year. By the end of December. Then you put into play the amount of debt that's already been created up to this point and what that may mean on the back end. So it's going to be a very delicate balancing act for fiscal conservatives like myself who are like, I don't want to spend any more money. And the realities of, putting people back to work, covering healthcare costs, creating related programs around infrastructure and so forth. So it's going to be a very difficult challenge for whoever becomes the next president, because that economic hole has got to get filled some kind of way. And it's going to be filled, unfortunately, on the backs of a lot of hardworking middle-class workers out there. And so that's a reality that we're going to have to face going into next year. And, there are infrastructure programs and the like, but you've got a hole, and that's a big hole because the healthcare costs are going through the roof.
Donna, quickly, your thoughts on the debt?
The resurgence of COVID will slow down any recovery.
Yep.
So it's important that we take this virus seriously, that we do everything that is appropriate to keep ourselves safe, our families safe, our essential workers safe. But the only way to build back stronger is to get this virus under control.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we want you, our viewers, to be a part of tonight's discussion. We are tracking your comments and questions on social media as we speak. Wish TV's Alexis Rogers handling that side of things for us tonight. Alexis, what are you seeing?
Well, of course, we wanted to ask you all, what did you want to know, especially from our special guest? And you've been very talkative online, and we pulled a couple of those. Jeff Rinkowski asks one question. So in all of the states with early voting on Election Day, how do I know that these counts actually counted? So that's what Jeffrey wants to know. Next up, we have Amanda Sims. Amanda says, voting is so important, but why are there so few polling places and such long lines? Most people don't have 4 to 6 hours to wait to vote, and there are a lot of people that may not be able to vote because of this. And I believe we have one more question from Robert Murley. His question is, do we think that all debates should be conducted before actual voting begins? Brooke and Phil, we'll take that question.
Alexis, thank you very much. Yeah, we'll bring Michael and Donna back in. Your thoughts on that question? I think it's a pretty good one, guys.
Well, I've attended all 3 of the debates this year: Cleveland, Salt Lake City, and just last week in Nashville. So I'm glad that as a Fox News contributor, I was actually able to be there. And by the way, I've had multiple COVID tests. I've had so many that I'm tired of it. But look, I want to tackle 2 questions. And Michael, I look forward to your response. I believe that voting should be accessible. I believe that every eligible citizen in this country should be able to acquire their voter registration card upon turning 18. I don't believe that you should ever be able to lose your voting rights unless you commit a crime that gives you a life sentence. And I'm in the minority on that, because I know friends who say, doesn't matter, you should continue to have voting rights. But when it comes to voting in this country, why is it such a hurdle? Why do people have to stand in long lines? I have a great joke now that I now tell my friends. My sister in 2000, when I was Al Gore's campaign manager, she called me one day on election day, and she said, how many IDs do I need to vote? I said, 1. She said, well, I have my driver's license, I have my voter registration card, but now they're asking for a utility bill. She had to provide a provisional ballot. She was upset. This past week, she was able to vote in person. Took her 3 hours. 3 hours. Now, luckily, my sister had 3 hours, but most Americans don't have 3 hours to stand in line. Most Americans cannot afford to take a day off to cast their ballot. So let's ensure that every eligible American citizen have the right to vote. I'm wearing John Lewis pen today because when I cast my ballot, I actually put it in the ballot box, the official ballot box. I want John Lewis to know that I remember that march. I remember the dangers he faced in crossing that bridge, and I remember his sacrifice. Do it for John Lewis. Do it for all of the Americans who sacrificed. Michael, I'll let you take that debate question.
Well, I want to put 2 cents on the voting question first, and I agree with Donna. I tend to be a little bit radical in this space as a conservative Republican, having grown up in Washington, D.C. and run campaigns there and certainly then getting elected in Maryland, another blue state. I appreciate more than most the value of that franchise and what it means to every citizen. And I think we do need to make it accessible. I do think we need to, if I had my way, if I were president for a day or the Congress for a day, I would make it a federal holiday. I would move it from November to April or May. So that there's sunshine and daylight. I would make it put it on the weekend so that we don't run into the situation where, as a lot of Hoosiers know, if you take off from work, you lose pay to go vote, right, unless you have a generous boss who says, okay, I'll cover you for the 3 hours you're going to be at the polls. If it's on a Saturday, that's not an issue. And for those who work on Saturdays, I'm sure employers would accommodate. But my point is looking at the franchise, looking at voting as a free market enterprise effort where a lot of ideas can come to make it better, we should do that. On the debate itself, first off, I don't think we should have debates with people. Lose the audience. I think the two individuals on the stage was the moderator without all the histrionics and the noise. I so appreciated that the audience in this one behaved themselves largely because it was masked and small. So that's one reform there. I do think, though, the debates should probably take place before all the voting has begun. The problem, though, with that is the timing between when conventions end and when voting begins in most states. A lot of states, not a lot, I say about 4 or 5 began, I know North Carolina was one of them, began voting on the week of September 15th. So right. You've got, the convention was over like August 30th. You got a 2-week window. You're not going to get three debates into that space. So that's something for the Presidential Commission on Debates to look at. It's something for each party to look at. But until you change that process and until the states decide to move back the time of elections, I think we're going to have to live with voting taking place, which means as a candidate, run a good campaign. Run a campaign in which you bank that vote as early as you can, knowing when voting starts, and make a good case to the American people. And you don't have to worry about when the debates are versus when voting starts.
All right. Well,
I also want to add, Brooke, excuse me. Sure. I also want to add that it's important that our fellow Americans understand that our voting system is very resilient. It's very strong. We have a decentralized form of government when it comes to voting. So I trust the local county clerk, or I trust here in the District of Columbia, the Board of Elections. I trust that they're able to count all of the ballots. And that's important in our democracy. We want every American to feel confident that his or her ballot will be received and will be counted. Counting the votes and counting all of the votes should not be a crisis. As you know, I endured those long 37 days waiting for the results in Florida. And while we did not get a full result, we did get an opportunity to go through the process of what it looks like to count all of the ballots. This time around, we're hoping that election officials across the country will continue to inform voters. They will continue to educate them up until the deadline of when those ballots must be turned in. So turn your ballot in, get it in.
I don't think this is the last conversation to be had on this topic for sure, but I want to change the discussion and take a turn. Recent polls show race relations at a 20-year low in America. The police often involved in these discussions. Michael, I want to start with you. A common GOP platform, law and order, right? Especially where we are seeing rioting. How does that message help the party?
Yeah, it's a mixed blessing. When I was national chairman, of course, we didn't have to deal with a lot of the strife that we see today. I always try to help the party leadership understand that when you say, I learned this from Rush Limbaugh many years ago, words mean things. right? And when I used to listen to Rush, he would always say, words matter, words mean things. And so you have to understand when people hear something, what they're hearing. So yes, law and order works in a lot of white communities around the country because their experience with the law is not the same as it is for African Americans. It's not that we're against law and order. No, absolutely not. But we also know what happens when the law and the order are out of sync. And there are too many times where, I have to tell my sons who are, one is in his 30s and there's others in his late 20s. I still talk to them about be careful when you're out and about with any encounters you may have with police. When you're with your white friends, understand that if you get stopped by the cops or a situation where cops come into a room, they're going to look at you very differently than they look at your buddies. You need to understand that. I had an incident just last year with a nephew who was at a party, and the police showed up because there was too much noise and everything. They pulled him aside. Now, he was one of two black kids in the room, but they pulled him aside. The other was a female. They pulled him aside, talked to him separately. Why? So that's our reality. So you can talk law and order, but you have to understand what I hear when you say it. And so for Republicans, I get the appeal of it, and I get why they say it. And black folks don't want looting and burning in their neighborhoods. They're not supporting that. You've heard that time and time again from a number of black families and victims of crime coming out and saying, stop this. This is not who we are. And we know that a lot of those people perpetrating that weren't from those neighborhoods. They were brought in. They were outsiders trying to agitate and cause a problem. So I think we need to understand and appreciate what communities of color hear when we speak this language, and understand that they're not against it. They're not. They want law and security. They want the police to do what police do to protect and serve, but they also want to know that there's equality and they're being treated equitably, and the law is not being used as a cudgel against them, and the order is such that it's out of order.
Got to be fair, right?
Yeah.
All right, we'll switch the conversation here to you, Donna, because on the flip side of that, a lot of Democrats have said that they support defunding police departments, but that message scares a lot of people, and they think it means getting rid of police departments. What does it really mean? And do you support it?
Rethinking policing in the 21st century. Just a few Democrats, not a lot of Democrats. Democrats come in all varieties. I'm a Southern Democrat, but I love my Northern Democrats. I even love my progressive Democrats. I consider myself more of a moderate. And I lean a little center left, as opposed to people who are calling taxpaying American citizens radical, as if to demonize people who are different or who have different value system. No, what it really means is that we need to ensure that in the 21st century, all of our police departments have the proper training, the proper tools to de-escalate situations that might turn, quote unquote, violent. I grew up in a household probably similar to Michael, because Michael and I are both Catholic, where we had to obey it all. I mean, we had the crucifix because we had to obey the Lord. And of course, we had the Constitution because we had to obey the law. But my mother used to say there's some other rules, and part of those rules was how we govern ourselves, how we respect one another. So I grew up in a household where my uncle was a cop, my cousin was a cop. So we loved ourselves some policemen, and we were afraid of them, whether they had on their blue uniform or off their blue uniform, because we thought they were some of the toughest people we knew. But here we are in the 21st century arguing about law and order when we should be talking about equal justice under the law. I tell my friends, and by the way, I live in a neighborhood where many of my white neighbors have Black Lives Matter sign. I had to go out and get one. I'm like, well, wait a minute. They got signs out in front of their homes, and I'm Black, and I don't have a sign out. So I went and got me a Black Lives Matter sign. I had to first ask my white neighbors, where did you get it? Because people understand Black Lives Matter is not anti-white or anti-Hispanic or anti-anyone else. It's to ensure that everybody should be treated with respect and common decency. And like Michael, this looting, the rioting, that's not what nonviolent protest is about. It's about calling attention to the things you want change, not about destroying property, not about destroying other people's lives. And we need to make sure that we can have 21st century policing and not go back to a bygone era.
We could probably spend the entire hour talking about this topic, no doubt about that, but we have other topics we want to get into. Let's talk about the Supreme Court. Amy Coney Barrett, Michael, now a Supreme Court justice. Was it a positive or a negative for Republican senators to act on the nomination just days before the election?
I think it actually turned out to be almost a neutral thing. Look, there was the politics of sort of the language from 2018 and 2016 and so forth. I mean, you know, where not 2018, 2016 during the last Supreme Court decision, where, you know, Republicans are like, well, you know, if this comes up again, we're going to act a certain way. So we get the hypocrisy. That's politics. Sometimes, you know, you kind of play that. I think what the Republicans expected to happen didn't happen, and that is that the Democrats would come in as they had done when then Judge Barrett was up for the appeals court, to come after her religion, to come after her faith tradition. And so you could see when there was no air put into that balloon, they were kind of like, what do we do here, right? In the main, I think she's going to be a good justice. I think she's a very smart, capable jurist. And I've always contended, and I still do, and I think this will be borne out, that a lot of the hoopla and the hype around these three appointees of President Trump will not prove out in the main to be that scary. Knowing two of them as I do, don't know Judge Barrett, but the reality of it is when you're on that bench, as we've learned with the chief judge, that the Constitution directs your actions. It directs your decision, not your politics. And because if that were the case, then healthcare would have been gone long before now. But the judges look at the law. They look at the question before them. They apply the constitutional principles, and they hopefully make a good decision. So I think the politics of this, I'd like to see less politics going forward in these appointments, and in this nominating process. I need and would love to see the Senate Republicans and Democrats grow up. And understand why they're called the most deliberative body in the world, and why they were up to recent history taken seriously when it comes to things as important as this.
And Donna, I want to get your take on this too, but I want to add a question to yours. A lot of talk about expanding the court or packing the court if Democrats win the White House and both houses of Congress. First of all, if you could explain that term to our viewers. I think there's some confusion surrounding it. And is that a good move for Democrats, or does it really just stir up more GOP votes?
Well, first of all, I apologize if it was my internet, but let me just say this, and I want everybody to take a deep breath, right? If this was another day and another time, I would have welcomed this conversation. And you know why? I was born in New Orleans, but grew up in Canada, went to school in Metairie. Amy Coney Barrett was born in Metairie and went to school in New Orleans. So while we didn't cross paths, we have similar backgrounds in terms of we grew up in the same region, we share the same religion, okay? But in this highly partisan atmosphere, I saw this as the Republicans jamming the courts, jamming through a nomination, less than 30 days. Soon after Justice Scalia, God rest his soul, soon after he passed away, took months. And then when President Obama nominated him, the Republicans said, no, it's too close to the election. Well, the election was in November, and this was early spring in February. So stop the hypocrisy. We don't want to lecture. Here's what Democrats should do. They should do, as Joe Biden said, take a look at this issue. Should we try to figure out a way to rebalance the courts? After all, under President Trump, he filled the 125 vacancies that President Obama could not fill, plus he has filled an additional 100. Packing the court has been what the Republican majority has done in the United States Senate. Now, look, hey, that's what they did with their majority. If the Democrats are able to get control of the Congress or in control of the United States Senate, this is going to be an issue. It's going to be a conversation. Republicans going to say, oh my God. Franklin Roosevelt was the first to suggest packing the courts back in, I believe, 1936, 1937. Trust me, I'm old, but I wasn't born then. But he considered doing it. In the end, he didn't do it to get through his New Deal through. So I don't know if there's an appetite. I do know that there are some progressives in the Democratic Party that would like to see it happen.
Donna, Michael, we're almost out of time, but before we let you go, 2021, obviously going to be a tumultuous year. What do you want to see happen in 2021 to bring us all together? And we'll start with you, Donna, real quick.
I want our economy. I want our economy back. I want our schools reopened. I would like to see this virus under control. It's very difficult to explain to anybody unless you've experienced it, what it's like to live under this pandemic, what it's like to spend your entire life teaching. I'm a teacher, and I cannot be in the classroom with my students. That's my lifeblood. That's who I am. So I want to see 2021, our economy is on the road to recovery. We've been able to find the proper vaccines and the proper mitigation, but I also want to see our schools reopen, our restaurants, and our bars, because I'm a Louisianian. Yes, I want to see it all reopen.
Yes.
Michael, your vision of 2021?
So I think before we get to all of that, we've got to reconnect as citizens, as Americans. How many of you Hoosiers out there are mad at a family member because they support Donald Trump or they support Joe Biden? How many of you are upset with a friend because they're not a part of your tribe, because you have political differences? Take the political planks out of your eye and start to look at each other again as citizens. Because all the things that Donna just described and all the things that we like to get done, we can't do it if we hate each other. We can't do it if we allow, white nationalists and neo-Nazis and hate groups control our destiny, control our conversation, and control our communities. So I'd like to see us begin to push past the ugly and the stupid that have sort of created the atmosphere we find ourselves in right now, and recognize that while I may disagree with Donna Brazile on healthcare and on the environment and a host of other policy issues, that's my sister, that's my friend. That's someone that I'm gonna go and have a nice tall Louisiana drink with, right?
And some gumbo, because you know I will stir it up for you.
We can't get to the gumbo until we're ready to do that.
Yeah.
So none of this happens unless we're ready to make it happen.
More in common than not, right? Michael, Donna, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure.
So we're not going to talk about the Saints and the Colts? I mean,
we want to talk about it all.
We could do it all night long.
You guys want to stay? You got another hour?
We're not going to talk football.
I wasn't even going there. I wasn't even going to go there.
You know, I had to do it.
Hey.
I still have the jersey from 2009, but I had to do it because I love you, Indiana. I love you. I really do.
Thanks so much. We really appreciate your time, both of you. We'll leave on that message of unity. Thanks so much. Hey, we are tracking your comments and questions on social media all evening. Wish TV's Alexis Rogers handling that for us. What are you seeing, Alexis?
You know what? You all just had a very passionate conversation, and the same thing has been happening online. So we pulled a couple of those conversation bits for you so that way we can keep that going. And we'll start with McReal, Milet, Victoria. They say, do you think the political season should be shorter? We'll go to the next one here. It looks like it's Kim Boyd. Kim wants to know, question for them, how will the Electoral College factor in this election? All right, and our last one, along the same lines here from Anita Sharon. She says, do you think the Electoral College should be abolished? Lots of conversations here, and of course, we'll continue to talk about it. Phil, Brooke?
Alexis, thank you very much. I want to talk about local politics now here in Indiana.
Yeah, we welcome in John Zodi, chairman of the Indiana Democratic Party, and Pete Seat, former communications director for the Indiana Republican Party, and a staffer in the White House press office for President George W. Bush. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Let's start with your general takeaways from this conversation. John, what'd you take away?
Well, I was glad to see my friend Donna Brazile on. She's a great political mind, joined by Michael Steele, certainly a more prominent voice in politics these days with his sort of bipartisan activity that he's been doing. So I think they are two people who have been, their unique experiences in American politics give them a very unique perspective going into anything but an ordinary year here, and so I couldn't hear everything about what they said, but I trust their wisdom here, especially Donna Brazile, who's just been a leader in our party.
Yeah. Pete, a lot of these national issues trickle down to the local level. What were your takeaways from this conversation, and what can we as Hoosiers take away from their messages?
Well, I appreciate both of them taking the time to talk to Hoosiers this evening. I don't know that I would necessarily say Michael Steele has a whole lot of wisdom when it comes to his choices for president this year, but that's a whole nother conversation we can have offline. But I really do appreciate them coming here to talk about it. And I think it shows the contrast between the success that we're having in Indiana with Republican leadership and the dysfunction that continues to take place no matter who is in charge in Washington, D.C. It's always dysfunction. You brought up COVID and a new stimulus package and the loggerheads that everyone is at on there. But here in Indiana, we're getting things done, and I think Hoosiers are seeing and hearing that contrast.
Well, Pete, let's stay here in Indiana. Your take on the governor's race. Here we are less than a week away.
Well, Governor Holcomb is in a commanding position. He's going to win, and he's going to win big. And it's because Hoosiers know leadership, and they know when they see leadership. And they've seen it from Governor Holcomb. 16 years into Republican leadership now, we're still breaking records because of responsible Republican leadership. Job creation, economic growth, investment in infrastructure and education, you name it, on down the list. Of course, some of that paused a little bit or maybe went back slightly because of the coronavirus pandemic that we're facing not just across the country but around the world. But because of Republican leadership, we have the blueprint and we'll be able to get back to that position and grow faster than our neighbors and the rest of the country.
John, your thoughts?
Well, what we've gone back on, Phil, is progress on beating this pandemic. We've got more cases. Today was the third highest amount of cases we've had since the pandemic began in Indiana. Nearly 4,000 people have died. 200,000 Hoosiers are out of work and can't find any. Indiana remains at the bottom of the list on all kinds of things. In this election, we were talking a lot about health care. While Todd Rokita, the Republican candidate for Attorney General, has pledged to fight to take health care away from Hoosiers, Jonathan Weinzapfel, our candidate for Attorney General, has pledged to take us out of that lawsuit on day one. 2.7 million people in Indiana live with a pre-existing condition. 500,000 people benefit from the HIP 2.0 program, which would be removed if the Affordable Care Act went away. The governor, the Republican candidate for Attorney General, Republicans state and nationwide have called for the repeal and elimination of the Affordable Care Act, and I think it's disgraceful and it's putting lives at risk during a pandemic.
And we can talk more about that in just a minute. I want to stick with COVID for a second because the approaches here are drastic, especially when you're talking about the third-party libertarian, Donald Rainwater. What do you think is the answer here? Are you opposed to or in favor of another shutdown of our city? Where do you stand with what's happening right now in the rising numbers?
Well, I'm not an epidemiologist. The governor has at his disposal healthcare professionals, medical professionals. What I do think we need to look at is that we're currently in stage 5 and we're seeing cases go up and up and up, which is putting lives at risk. We have to look at what the reasons for doing that were. It seems to be politics to me, getting pressure from the White House to open up the states and do everything you need to do while the economy in the state dropped off. Our GDP dropped off in the second quarter. We've got those hundreds of thousands of Hoosiers out of work. So I think it was politics that led to that decision and not science.
Is it politics or is economic numbers an important factor in this decision to shut down?
Well, you can't have a healthy economy without healthy Hoosiers. And so I think the majority influence here was politics with the governor, getting pressure from the president, who just about 2 or 3 weeks ago was diagnosed with the virus himself. The vice president and the governor appeared maskless in our state's second largest city at a rally. The governor and the vice president need to take responsibility, which they haven't done. Again, almost 2,600 people were diagnosed with the virus today. Nearly 4,000 people in this state have lost their lives. It's got to be more under control than it is, and this governor has made it under control.
Pete, would you entertain the idea of shutting down again?
Well, I appreciate John admitting that he's not an epidemiologist, because there's a lot of people in this state and around this country who are pretending to be such these days. But I appreciate Governor Holcomb's leadership on it. I quite frankly find it absurd and offensive to think that this is being dictated from Washington and by the White House, which is not something I say often. I might be a delicate millennial flower, but I'm not often offended, and I find that offensive. I think the governor is following the data. He is listening to the experts that are surrounding him and that he talks to each and every day. He's partnering with communities around the state. He's partnering with healthcare facilities, making sure that we have surge capacity if we need it, with ICU rooms, with ventilators, you name it. He worked together with the life sciences industry to ensure that we had the testing capacity that we need, and we now have over 200 testing sites around this state. We are making progress on this. Now, the one thing you didn't mention, John, is your candidate for governor wants to shut the state down. That's what he wants to do. He wants the policy of whiplash. Numbers go up, we shut down. Numbers go down, we open up. You can't do that. We need some sense of consistency. The Libertarian candidate, on the other hand, he just wants to open everything up and hope for the best. And neither is a responsible approach. We need to balance the health of this economy and the health of Hoosiers, and Governor Holcomb is doing that.
Do you want to respond, John?
Yeah, look. The governor is the chair of the president's campaign in this state. They have partnered up, and Republicans are systematically suppressing votes in this state. For instance, when you talk about opening up a state, the governor, for political reasons, refused to allow what's known as no excuse absentee voting this year for political reasons, which, as you see, are requiring people to stand in lines, especially here in Marion County, to vote. That is putting people at risk because the governor and the Republican Party chose politics. The president of the United States is standing at the podium at the White House questioning the integrity of this election. So his Republican counterparts have nothing to do but respond to him and act accordingly and suppress votes here in Indiana. This virus is raging, it's going in the wrong direction, and people are standing in line for hours and hours to exercise their constitutionally protected right. The governor and the Republican Party in this state are responsible.
Dr. Woody Myers was on with us on All Indiana Politics a couple of weeks ago, and he said that if medical experts recommended shutting down again, he would do that. Your reaction to that? Do you think that's smart, especially during this time of year?
Well, as a physician, Dr. Myers knows more than I ever will about the spread of a virus and the treatment of a virus. So I think he's a good one to listen to advice for. I think he's the best candidate we could have had in a pandemic like this. Someone who's spent their career treating people in an emergency room, treating people in the private sector and the public sector. So I trust his opinion.
All right, we want to take a turn and talk about the Attorney General race. Pete, start with you, your overall thoughts on these candidates.
Well, I think this race is going to come down to familiarity and who Hoosiers know. They know Todd Rokita. He was elected statewide twice, served as Secretary of State for 2 terms, and obviously as a member of Congress. And it's going to come down to trust. John's candidate, the former mayor of Evansville, can't be trusted. He made backroom deals when he was the mayor of Evansville to eliminate the homestead tax credit, increase taxes by millions of dollars on the citizens of his city. And, you know, not a lot of Hoosiers know who he is. He doesn't have name ID. He's wanted to run statewide probably 12 times before this, never actually did. But here he is running now, and Hoosiers are learning about his record. But when it comes to Todd Rokita, they know who he is. They know he's a conservative Republican and that this is a conservative state. John's candidate is a liberal Democrat trying to run in conservative Indiana.
Let's talk about a record, and I'm going to remind you of 3 numbers. 2.7 million. That's the number of Hoosiers that live with a pre-existing condition right now, including myself. 500,000, those are the number of Hoosiers who rely on the HIP 2.0 program, which is funded by the Affordable Care Act. 54 is the number of times Todd Rokita voted to eliminate the Affordable Care Act and tear health care out of the hands of 500,000 Hoosiers and nearly 30 million Americans. Todd Rokita cannot be trusted because in Congress he followed an ideology, not a constituency. He's running for Attorney General and said he would keep us in a lawsuit that during a global pandemic would remove the health care of millions and millions of Americans and hundreds of thousands of Hoosiers if the court decides the wrong direction.
And I have to jump in real quick
Go ahead.
because this is scare tactics.
This is not scare tactics at all.
It is not.
at all.
It is not. Yes,
Absolutely
it is, John.
not,
It is
Pete.
not all or nothing.
Yes, it is.
You can still have protections for pre-existing conditions, which I don't know of a single person who has said that they don't want that.
Will the court
On
guarantee
top of
that?
that, the Indiana General Assembly last year passed legislation to protect pre-existing conditions in this very state. So it is not an all or nothing proposition. This is being used, this political rhetoric is being used to scare Hoosiers and scare Americans. That's the bottom line. And we are a nation of laws. So we should address in the courts if we believe something is unconstitutional. We have co-equal branches of government. That's what the process is there for. A federal court has already said that the individual mandate in Obamacare is unconstitutional. The Supreme Court will likely now look at it. That's the way the system is supposed to work, John. If it's unconstitutional, it shouldn't remain in law just because you want it to remain in law.
I didn't realize Pete was the newest Supreme Court justice who has the unilateral authority to decide whether the Health Care Act is constitutional. Look, if you want to talk about co-equal branches of government, the President of the United States has sabotaged the Affordable Care Act from day one. The Supreme Court is in question. This will be before them next week to decide whether the ACA is severable from the individual mandate. If it's not, it could all go. The Congress, which Todd Rokita served in, voted 54 times plus to eliminate the ACA. So we don't have friendly faces and voices within the three co-equal branches of government right now as it relates to Republicans and the Affordable Care Act.
We have 2 minutes left, so quickly. 5th District. Obviously, this is something that has a lot of attention on it nationally and locally. Are you confident? Here we are 6 days out, 5 days out at this point,
I'm
John?
very confident. Christina Hale is a wonderful candidate. She's done everything she needs to do. The suburbs are moving more Democratic. We picked up seats in cities across the 5th District last year, in Zionsville, in Carmel, in Fishers, where we haven't elected Democrats before. I think that campaign is moving our way. It's rated as a top toss-up nationally. I think Christina Hale is going to be the next member of Congress from the 5th District.
Pete?
If Christina wins, she'll be a member of Congress for 2 years, so it might be a morale booster for your party. It won't last long. Victoria Spartz has a solid message. She can actually talk about socialism and the ills of socialism because she's lived socialism. And obviously now it's about getting out the vote. But there's no doubt it's a competitive race. I mean, $11 million has been spent between the candidates and outside groups from around the country. It's a very, very important race.
Well, this is not a socialist country, and it sounds like Pete thinks Christina's going to win because that's the first place he went. So this is not a socialist country. It's absurd to even assert that.
We have 60 seconds left. I just want your final thoughts, your push to voters, why to get out, who to vote for, in a few words.
Well, first I would ask them to make a plan to vote. We see long lines, we see enthusiasm out there, but we also see voter suppression and people standing in lines when they shouldn't be. So we're encouraging everyone to make a plan to vote between now and Election Day. And as far as who to vote for, you want to vote for people who are going to be on the side of health care, on the side of public education, on the side of equal rights, and many other issues, workers' rights, and those are Democrats.
Pete, final words.
Indiana's on the move. Indiana's breaking records because of responsible Republican leadership, from Mitch Daniels to Mike Pence, now to Eric Holcomb, supermajorities in the House and the Senate. You name it, we're getting things done. Folks should go out to vote. You're wrong on voter suppression. I'll tweet about it later.
You guys can talk about it off camera. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you at home for joining us tonight for a special edition of All Indiana Politics.
We want to thank all of our guests today. Have a great night, everyone. We'll see you tonight.